At my 29th birthday party, my husband stood next to a pregnant woman and announced to the entire room, "This is my heir." The room went silent. I just smiled, handed him a box, and said, "I know. This gift is for you." He opened it, and his hands began to tremble. Before I tell you everything, I'd really appreciate it if you hit subscribe, tap the like button, and let me know in the comments which state or city you're listening from. I'm always curious to know where my voice is reaching around the world. Now just sit down, take a deep breath, and let this story flow all the way through. That morning, my 29th birthday, smelled like freshly brewed Ethiopian coffee and damp grass outside. I woke up like I always did. No alarm needed. Exactly at 6 a.m., with the first light of the sun slipping past the curtains, brushing a golden streak across the living room wall where a painting hung. One Hudson had chosen just because it looks rich. I carried my coffee out to the porch, sat in the white rattan chair from the living room set, and looked out at the little garden behind the house. Flower beds I planted myself nestled between Versailles-style sculpted shrubs, an Italian fountain, and a Provence rose trellis. Everything was his taste, luxurious, showy. This house, from the glossy leather sofa to the chandelier floating over our heads, was almost entirely Hudson's aesthetic. I took a sip of coffee, that warm bitterness sliding down my throat, and like always, memories pulled me back to the early days when our company was gasping for air under debt. That year, Hudson told me he had a life-changing idea: a luxury furniture workshop with imported European machinery. 8 months later, it all collapsed. Piles of debt. Still, he wanted to keep fighting for his startup. The only problem? No one would lend him money. Bad credit, unresolved debts. Banks said no. Even suppliers wouldn't trust him. Instead of walking away, I stayed. Through my uncle, a silent investor, I kept the funding alive. He warned me. Every major contract, equipment order, and shareholding had to be under my name to protect the money I agreed, with one condition. He had to keep it a secret so Hudson could still think he was building an empire. But in the lawyer's drawer, every contract had my name on it. Hudson gradually saw me as another luxury furnishing, useful, durable, invisible. I was the one renegotiating warehouse leases, finding new suppliers, cutting out wasteful expenses, reading every line of contracts I used to let him sign without question. I was the one who made a dozen phone calls to find an accountant tough enough to untangle the chaotic books he'd left behind. The phone rang. "Marlene, Mom," flashed on the screen I picked up, and her voice came through. No birthday wishes, just, "Serena, are you up yet? We've got a lot of guests today. Make sure there's enough food. Don't let Hudson start drinking too early. And clean up those tacky little plants on the porch. They look cheap." She hung up before I could say yes. I looked at the screen going dark, my finger still hovering over the call button, and just smiled faintly. In her eyes, I was always the one being financially supported, someone to be taken care of. She had no idea I was the one who signed every lease, every equipment renewal, every first payroll when we had no profits. The supplier meetings, the late-night financial reports. She never saw them, and I never needed her to. About an hour later, James arrived, my best friend, the boy next door since we were kids. He brought a small cake, not the kind made for social media, but rich with the smell of butter and vanilla. He handed it to me and gave me a hug, holding me just a bit longer than usual. He asked quietly, just loud enough for me to hear, "Serena, are you okay?" I rested my chin on his shoulder for a moment, inhaled the familiar scent of his soap on his shirt, then stepped back and smiled like everything was perfectly fine. A CT2. By around 5 in the afternoon, the house was packed. Living room, backyard, even the hallway leading to the pool was filled with familiar faces. Friends, relatives, business partners, and key staff from Hudson's company. They brought flowers, complimented the caramel apple pie and my French-style garden. I smiled, nodded, thanked them, poured more wine. I played the role I knew by heart, the sweet wife, the thoughtful daughter-in-law, the young lady of the house, elegant and warm. Hudson was exactly where he liked to be, at the center of every conversation circle. He moved from group to group, patting men on the back, shaking hands, laughing loudly, cracking jokes that made the whole room laugh along, then turning to their wives or girlfriends with a mix of teasing and charm. He talked about contracts soon to be signed, plans to expand the workshop, vision and branding, as if he'd built the whole thing on his own. I occasionally caught a line he said to someone, "My house, my pool, my company." Heads nodded. No one asked, no one questioned it, because in their eyes, this was simply Hudson's house. No one knew that this house, and the Buckhead apartment, and even the business account used to pay their salaries each month, were all in my name, just like my uncle had advised, the man who raised me after my parents died in a car crash. Put everything under your name, that's your last invisible fortress. I remember clearly that afternoon, him sitting across from me, saying those words slowly, handing me the papers I signed, the same ones now sitting somewhere in the lawyer's safe. I was pouring lemonade for a guest when I heard the sound of metal tapping glass. Hudson had picked up a champagne flute and was gently tapping it with the back of a butter knife. Ting, 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 the chatter started to fade. Half-finished stories hung in the air, and every eye turned toward him. He stood in the backyard under strings of warm yellow lights, posture upright, chin slightly raised, with the confidence of a man who believed the whole world revolved around him. "Friends, family," he began, pausing deliberately like he was on stage. "Today, we're here to celebrate my wife's birthday, Serena, the foundation of my life, the one who's always been by my side." A scattered round of applause. He looked at me then, with that smug smile only I could fully recognize. I stood still, hand still holding the lemonade pitcher, feeling dozens of eyes brush over my face, waiting to see just how sweet his words would be. "But today," Hudson went on, his voice dropping half a tone for drama, "I don't just want to celebrate, I want to be honest, with everyone, with myself, and with Serena." I saw a few relatives glance at each other. My mother-in-law sat up straighter, brow furrowing. James had already come to stand beside me. Hudson took a breath and said, voice trembling slightly from excitement he thought he was hiding, "For the past few years, I've been living two lives. And today, I want to make things right." He nodded toward the gate. Everyone turned. From the outer edge of the lawn, a woman stepped into the light. A fitted beige dress, neatly curled hair, eyes scanning the space like she was assessing the value of each item in the house. Her belly was unmistakably pregnant. I recognized her instantly. Noelle, the girl who used to be Hudson's office assistant when the company first launched. Behind her were a few of Hudson's former colleagues, pretending not to look directly at me. Hudson walked to Noelle, placed his hand on the bare skin of her back, and led her straight to where I was standing. "Serena, thank you. You've been such a strong foundation," he said, turning to the crowd, "that I've been able to build not one, but two homes on it." A few awkward chuckles, the kind people let out when they're unsure if it's a joke. "Because of this foundation," he continued, still gesturing toward me like I was a feature in a real estate pitch, "we all have what we have today. And so, today, I'd like to introduce you to Noelle and our heir. They are both part of my family. I love all of them." That line, "I love all of them," was delivered like he was generously distributing his spoils to the masses. Without even glancing at my reaction, he placed Noelle right next to me, so close I could smell her sharp, musky perfume. He arranged us like a family photo. Ex-wife, mistress, unborn child, him in the center, the guests as the backdrop. Somewhere at the dining table, someone dropped a fork. The clink of metal on china rang out strangely clear. Someone inhaled sharply. My mother-in-law put her hand on her forehead, whispering, "Oh Lord," like she'd just been betrayed herself. The party didn't just fall silent. It froze. In my head flashed a sentence, "Hudson." had once thrown at me during an argument. If I leave, who pays the debts? Who keeps the company running? Don't forget those debts are under your name. You and I are tied together now. And now, standing on the lawn, his hand on his mistress's back, with every guest's eyes soaked in a mixture of pity and curiosity aimed at me, I realized he really believed that he thought I had no way out. In that moment, I didn't feel the ground collapse or my heart shatter. No, I felt something else, something strangely calm, sharp, and final. A soft click echoed in my head, like a rusted lock finally turning into place after years, and a heavy steel door slammed shut for good. Then the thought came. Not loud, not panicked. It rang as quietly as a lone bell in cold air. I stood between my husband and his mistress. The world around us paused. I saw Mrs. Marie from next door, frozen still, her cocktail glass suspended midair. I saw my mother-in-law, Marlene, face pale, instinctively stepping back, as if the truth about her son might tarnish the perfect image she clung to. The silence was thick enough to touch, pressing against my ears, swallowing the wind, the rustle of leaves. I slowly turned and smiled. A polite, distant smile, the kind a hostess gives latecomers to a party. I scanned every stunned face, pausing just long enough on each one to silently say, "I see you. I'm here. I'm fully awake." Then I looked back at Hudson. He still had his hand on Noelle's shoulder, face lit with smug satisfaction, like a man standing atop some great triumph. He waited for my reaction. Tears, yelling, a breakdown to prove I was unstable. He was ready to play the gracious winner, soothing the loser. I walked over to the small table on the patio where my gift had sat all evening. A box wrapped in deep red silk ribbon, thick ivory paper, no print, elegant and discreet. 6 months ago, when James warned me, when I discovered everything, I spent an entire afternoon picking out that paper. Every detail had to be perfect. I lifted the box, weightless, and returned to Hudson, now watching me with a flicker of unease. "I know, Hudson," I said. My voice didn't shake. It was steady, maybe softer than usual. "This gift is for you." I held it out. He hesitated, a beat too long, as if his script had glitched. Then, almost mechanically, he let go of Noelle's shoulder and took it. His fingers brushed mine, warm, slightly damp, and I pulled away instantly. He looked at the box, then at me. A mocking smile crept across his face. Maybe he thought it was some sad parting gift, a watch, cufflinks, a final attempt at dignity from a betrayed wife. He tugged the ribbon. It slid off into the grass. He tore the paper, no longer confident, a little too forceful. Beneath it was a plain white cardboard box. He opened it. I watched each shift in his face. Inside, on white satin, was one item. A single piece of paper, neatly folded in half. Hudson opened it. His eyes skimmed, then slowed, stumbling over each line. I knew them by heart. I'd sat with my lawyer for hours, perfecting every word. Notice of marriage termination due to prolonged infidelity. Based on documentation of independently held assets, notification of full freeze on all joint accounts and related properties. Restriction order applies to the following addresses. 1. Decatur Residence, Atlanta. 2. Buckhead Apartment, Atlanta. His left hand, the one holding the paper, was the first to tremble, a subtle shake creeping up his shoulder. Then the right hand followed. The paper crinkled like dry leaves in wind. He looked up at me. No smugness, no victory left in front of me. Wasn't a man who owned it all, but a cheater, unmoored, face drained. There was no rage in his eyes, no pain, only raw, instinctive confusion, like a beast kicked out of the den he thought was safe. He tried to speak, lips parted, but all that came out was a dry rasp. He looked at the paper, then back at me, searching my face for an explanation, a sign that this was a bluff, a power move. But my face was calm, untouchable. 5 years of handling everything, everyone, had taught me how to mask emotion. 5 years building the wall, the foundation as he called it. And today, it held behind it. There was nothing. No pain, no love, no affection, just cold, echoing freedom. Noelle stood beside him, clueless. She looked anxiously at his changing face. Hudson. What is that? She whispered, trying to see the paper. He didn't answer. He just stood there, hands shaking, while the world built from my money, my work, my silence, crumbled in front of his friends and relatives. I held his gaze a few seconds longer, then turned to James. My friend, my brother, the only one who never left my side. He looked at me, eyes filled with concern. I nodded gently and said, just loud enough for him to hear, "It's time." The performance was over. Time to lower the curtain. No words were needed. He placed a light hand on my shoulder, a quiet gesture of comfort. I turned and walked back inside. No running, no rush. I walked slowly, with purpose, away from the frozen scene on the lawn. Guests parted like water before the bow of a ship, avoiding my eyes. I felt their stares. Behind me, mixed shock, pity, and, to be honest, a touch of guilty thrill. Hudson still stood in the yard, paper fluttering in his hand, next to the woman he'd chosen to showcase. A reveal now detonated in his own face. He called something after me. My name, maybe. But his voice was swallowed by the heavy silence coating the garden like oil. He wasn't my husband anymore, and he held no power over me. Even his voice felt foreign now. Behind me, I heard him scream in despair. Then a flurry of movement, then footsteps stumbling. And finally, Noelle's panicked voice chasing after him. I turned back with the perfect hostess smile. "Thank you all for coming," I said, voice clear, soft but cold. "I'm afraid the party ends here. Please enjoy the remaining desserts and drinks. Wishing you all the best." That was it. A courteous announcement. No explanation, no drama. A quiet retreat, quickly begun. I heard whispers, footsteps on gravel, engines starting. No one came to say goodbye. No one dared meet my eye. 10 minutes later, only plates remained on the lawn. Half-full glasses, crushed flowers. On the grass, Hudson snapped out of his daze, grabbed Noelle's hand, and stormed toward the gate, out of my house, out of my life, with a rage soaked in helplessness. When the last car disappeared and the evening silence returned to the neighborhood, James looked at me. "I'm fine." I smiled and told him, "Everything happened exactly as it should. Can you help me clear the table?" We cleaned up in quiet, collected dirty plates, folded the tablecloth, took out the trash, familiar, mundane tasks that soothed the mind. Each gesture had a purpose, every motion already known. I washed the glasses, thin crystal ones. Water rinsed away strange lipstick stains, strange wine. And I felt that, along with the dirt, something else was being washed away. 5 years I'd mistaken sacrifice and support as love. As family, James worked beside me, occasionally glancing at me with concern. He was waiting for me to break, cry, scream, but I was calm. Inside me was silence, emptiness. No pain, no bitterness, just a cold lightness, like I had carried a burden my whole life and finally laid it down. When we finished, it was late. The house was clean, quiet, mine. I brewed mint tea from the garden. We sat on the porch, watching the stars. My phone buzzed, sharp and shrill. Breaking the peace, James picked it up. Hudson's name flashed on the screen. A missed call, and a second later, a voicemail. James looked at me, checking. I put it on speaker, the voice shattered through the night, distorted with anger, hoarse and raw. "Serena, are you insane? What the hell kind of circus stunt was that? You humiliated me in front of everyone. Is this some childish tantrum, cheap revenge? Have you lost your mind? The debts? Did you forget them? Do you even understand what you've done?" His voice cracked with fury. In the background, Noelle's voice tried to soothe him. "Hudson, calm down, don't say that," he yelled. "I'll make you lose everything, Serena." "You have until morning to apologize. You should have just gone along with it. If not, I swear you'll regret it, deeply regret it. Wake up before it's too late. The message cut off. We sat in silence for a moment. James looked at me, his face tense. Serena! I slowly picked up the teacup. My hand was steady. I took a sip. The mint tasted fresh and clean. He still doesn't get it, I said. He and Noelle think this is just a woman's tantrum, a dramatic outburst that'll pass by morning. They don't see the planning, the preparation, or the rage that's been frozen over for a year. They only see what they want to see. A childless wife throwing a fit after being cheated on. They still believe they're in control. I looked at James. His eyes carried the same question as Hudson's voice. What now? I placed the cup on the table. The sound of porcelain on wood was the only sound that night. Tomorrow morning at 10, I meet with the lawyer, I said softly. My voice was steady. No doubt. His screaming on voicemail didn't scare me. It only sharpened my will. Like a blacksmith plunging red-hot steel into cold water, his words turned my will into iron. He didn't know today wasn't the beginning. It was the ending, the full stop I'd been aiming for all year. The next morning, I drove into Atlanta in silence. Victor Bryant's office was in the old building off Peachtree Street, behind a heavy mahogany door. The room smelled faintly of expensive cologne and old books. Victor Bryant fit the space, solid, older, eyes sharp and unreadable. He used to work with my uncle, which is why I sought him out. I could trust him. He greeted me at the door, led me to the large desk, and offered coffee. Serena, he began as we sat, his tone professional, measured. As agreed, all notifications have been sent. Accounts and assets have been frozen. The process is underway. Has Hudson or any representative reached out yet? Just one voicemail, filled with threats and accusations, I replied, my tone light, like giving a weather report. Victor gave a slight nod, as if that fell neatly within the scenario he had anticipated. No surprise at this stage, he still believes he's controlling the game. That feeling won't last long. He paused, folded his hands on the desk, and his gaze turned serious. Serena, the basic preparations are done. But there's one more thing. When you first came to me, out of professional habit, I decided to dig a little deeper. As a precaution, I needed to know exactly what we were up against. And unfortunately, what I found is worse than what I'd expected. He pulled open a drawer, took out a thin, unmarked folder, and placed it in front of me. I'm obligated to inform you of something extremely disturbing. This goes beyond infidelity. This was a calculated plan, deliberately targeting you. I didn't move. I just stared at the cover of the file. What is it? I asked. Victor opened the folder, pulled out a few sheets of paper, and slid them toward me. This is a copy of a petition your husband submitted to the county's psychiatric unit last month, requesting a mandatory psychological competency evaluation for you. An official form, typed, with Hudson's familiar, jagged signature at the bottom. This is the legal first step, the lawyer's flat voice continued, like from a distance, to declare someone mentally unfit and petition for guardianship, thereby gaining full control over the assets. I picked up the top sheet. It was a list of symptoms my husband had reported. I began reading. Frequently misplaces personal items, unable to recall location of phone, keys, or documents, indicating signs of progressive short-term memory loss. I remembered last week searching the whole room for my phone, only to find it still in the car. But I was certain I hadn't left the house that day. I even laughed and told James maybe I should install cameras in the house. Exhibits disorganization in daily routine. Confuses basic kitchen items such as salt and sugar, posing potential harm to self or others. I had once, while exhausted and sleep-deprived, scooped salt into the sugar jar, realized it, dumped it out, and replaced it with fresh sugar. Hudson had chuckled that day, saying, "You're working too much. It's messing with your head." Turns out, he was taking notes, gathering evidence. Displays social withdrawal and isolation, avoids interaction with friends, spends extended periods sitting alone in the garden, frequently talks to empty baby crib, sits for hours hugging a pillow in silence, suggestive of detachment from reality. Every routine, every expression of grief after the miscarriage, he twisted into clinical symptoms. I remembered the day I lost the baby. The hospital, cold and white, smelling of disinfectant I had called him, voice breaking. "I'm busy, let my mom handle it," was all I got. But no one came, not a soul. I lay in that hospital bed alone, arms around an empty belly, while he was at the workshop raising a glass, talking contracts, laughing so loudly he probably didn't hear the phone vibrate. Each line of that petition felt like acid dripping down my skin. Every unconscious gesture, every moment of exhaustion, every breath a grieving mother took just to stay sane, he had distorted it into evidence that I was insane. Every sentence carried a sliver of truth, mixed with a flood of lies, forming a poison crafted specifically to destroy me. My hands, flat on the polished wooden desk, didn't tremble, but I felt the warmth slowly draining from my fingertips. Bit by bit, the cold crept into my palms, my wrists, like the blood was slowly retreating, leaving behind a frozen hollow. I looked up and out the window. Outside, Atlanta moved to its usual rhythm. People rushing, traffic packed, sunlight bouncing off glass towers into glaring patterns. But for a few seconds, all of that seemed to fade out. A vacuum of silence wrapped around everything, and in that silence, I understood. This wasn't just an affair. An affair is a betrayal of love. But this was a strategy to erase me, to take my house, my money, then my name, my mind, to turn me into a silent ghost behind four walls, while he and his true love enjoyed everything I had inherited from my family. Whatever last flicker of feeling I had left for him, some tiny ember of pity or shared memory, it didn't just go out. It froze into a blade of ice. I slowly placed the papers back on the table, stacking them neatly. Looked at Victor. "Thank you, Victor," I said. My voice was even, but something in it had shifted irrevocably. "Everything is in place. What's the next step?" Victor Bryant nodded, his gaze sharpening like a surgeon's after locating a tumor and preparing to make the first cut. "The next step," he said, "is we begin removing it." And I nodded, without hesitation, without looking back. The entire legal plan I'd quietly nurtured for the past year was officially in motion from that moment on. On the drive home from the lawyer's office, Victor's words still echoed in my mind, but outside, another machine had already started moving. Somewhere in the city, a court courier was making his way to the hotel. Victor's assistant was on the phone with the bank. The legal team at the company was sending urgent emails to the board of directors. Every link I'd spent a year preparing was being activated at once. The first strike, as Victor later recounted, landed exactly where Hudson least expected. A lavish breakfast at a downtown hotel, where he and Noelle were likely still eating, talking about their plans, probably discussing how generously they might accept my apology. Mid-conversation, a man in a tailored suit walked up to their table. No smile, no long explanation, just placed a thick envelope in front of Hudson and asked him to sign for receipt. Inside the envelope was not only the divorce petition, but also a court order, prohibiting him from contacting or approaching me directly, all communication to go through attorneys. Included was a separate notice barring him from stepping foot on any property under my name. I could picture it clearly, him bending down to read, the usual smirk slipping off his face, replaced by the tightening veins at his neck. He would have crumpled the paper, slammed the table, started rambling about a husband's rights, about how half of everything belongs to him. In his mind, 5 years of marriage and those years of building a business together automatically entitled him to everything I held title to. Meanwhile, I was home. The locksmith arrived. An older man, quiet. He worked quickly, silently. With a series of clicks and scrapes, he removed the old locks on the gate and the front door. The locks Hudson still had keys to. I stood on the porch, and listened to the sounds. Each turn of the screwdriver, each new mechanism snapping into place was music. A liberation score. I was cleansing my home of a toxin that had seeped in too long. Through James, I learned that Hudson dragged Noelle to the condo in Buckhead, probably planning to stage some kind of heroic scene, banging on doors, yelling, proving he was still the man of this house. Instead, all he managed to do was stand in the hallway, jabbing his key repeatedly into the shiny new lock. The old key no longer worked. He could ring the bell, knock, scream all he wanted, but behind that door was absolute silence. That door, from the moment the lock changed, had become foreign territory to him, a boundary he could no longer cross. By late afternoon, it was time for the meeting Hudson definitely didn't see coming. I requested an emergency boardroom session with the company's board of directors, those who had always believed Hudson was the soul, the man who built it all from scratch. What they didn't know was that, according to all legal documents, the majority shareholder holding 51% was me, the niece backed by my uncle's capital, the name standing in for a so-called genius with shredded credit. Once everyone was present, some still confused about the CEO's absence, I placed a file on the table: share registration documents, capital contribution records, internal loan contracts, emails proving Hudson used the company credit card to pay for plane tickets, beachfront hotels, and fine dining, all charged to the company for trips where Noelle appeared on every receipt. The CFO stayed silent. The in-house attorney only needed a glance to grasp the issue. Within less than an hour, a resolution was proposed and passed to temporarily suspend Hudson as CEO due to serious ethical violations and misuse of company assets. It was recorded, signed, and finalized. Denise Carter, the same woman who had helped cover up the numbers for those transactions, received an immediate termination email. Attached was a detailed spending report, a cold mirror reflecting everything she had overlooked. That evening, while Hudson was still busy yelling outside the Buckhead condo hallway, the company he once strutted through with such pride had already sent out an internal memo to all staff. The CEO was suspended pending investigation, and interim control had been transferred to the board. The final blow of that day was something he couldn't ignore: the luxury SUV I'd gifted him on the one-year anniversary of rebuilding the business. As he, exhausted and furious, tried to climb into the vehicle to figure out his next move, a tow truck rolled up. Two men in bright orange vests stepped out, calmly hooking up chains. Securing the frame, Hudson rushed out, waving his arms, shouting, "Private property," threatening to call the police. But the foreman simply handed him a folder, a repossession notice issued at the request of the legal owner, under owner, in bold print, was my name: Serena Vale. I have no doubt that in that exact moment, the contempt in Noelle's eyes shattered, replaced by confusion. She watched the man who once strutted her through the company hallways, puffing his chest, saying, "I've got this," now standing helpless, yelling at a tow truck, and she understood. They weren't facing some childish, emotional wife, easy to manipulate. They'd stumbled into something cold, quiet, and entirely calculated. A woman who was both the victim and the surgeon, who didn't need to scream, didn't need to threaten, just calmly severed every tie that bound them to their old world. That night, as I expected, the fear began to spread like a thin contagion through the family. My phone buzzed with messages from the Holloway family group chat. My mother-in-law, Marlene, unable to tell right from wrong, simply sobbing that, "Our daughter-in-law's gone insane. She kicked Hudson out, cut off all the money. We have to do something. We have to save him, poor Hudson." She forgot I was in the group, too. My avatar right next to her name, I tapped reply. "Don't worry, Mom," I typed. "Your son will be fine. He's just beginning to learn how to live independently and take responsibility for his own mistakes." That night, I slept deeply, dreamlessly, like someone finally breathing after breaking open the window of a suffocating room. I knew it wasn't over. I knew that after panic would come the next phase. Desperation turned reckless. A man who's lost almost everything, who believes he's entitled to compensation, can do things no one predicts. I knew they'd try to return, to break through the defenses I'd built. They'd play one last dirtiest card. But I also knew I had prepared for all of it, and I was ready. On the third day after meeting with the lawyer, I drove myself to the supermarket near the train station. The weather was warm, heat rising off the pavement mixed with the scent of ripe fruit and jasmine planted along the walkway. I pushed my cart slowly through the aisles, picked up a loaf of bread, some milk, a few small things for breakfast. Nothing special, just the little things to maintain a normal life. After I paid and walked out the door with my bag, they appeared. An old, chipped paint car screeched to a stop at the curb. Hudson nearly leapt out of the driver's seat. Noelle followed behind, slower, but just as bitter. Both looked utterly wrecked. Hudson was still wearing the same blue blazer I'd ironed for his birthday, now wrinkled, the collar grimy. He blocked my path, forcing me to stop. "Serena." Hudson started, his voice strange, caught between rage and begging. "We need to talk. You can't do this. You're not allowed to do this to me." I stared at him silently. "You cut off everything. Everything. How am I supposed to live? You tossed me out like a dog after 5 years. 5 years of marriage. Do you even understand what you're doing?" He flailed his arms, trying to draw attention from passers-by. But a few glanced over, saw what looked like a typical domestic argument, and moved on. I remained silent, letting him spill it all. I knew underneath the anger was pure fear. When he realized shouting wasn't working, his shoulders slumped, and his tone softened, dripping with cheap desperation. "Serena, don't you remember? When we first fell in love, when we built everything together. Have you forgotten all of that, just for one mistake? I was wrong, I admit it. But does it really have to destroy everything?" He searched my eyes for the woman I used to be, the wife who forgave, who endured, who carried it all so he wouldn't have to. But all he found was an empty space. When he saw his pleading was useless, Noelle stepped forward, her eyes sharpening. "Mrs. Vale," she began, trying to sound composed, but each word dripped resentment. "You want to hate me, resent Hudson, fine. But the baby in my belly? He's done nothing wrong." She lifted her chin, voice rising, laced with both fury and desperation. "No matter what you think, he's still Hudson's child. He deserves support. You didn't just take everything from him. You're taking it from my child, too. You were a mother once, weren't you?" She aimed for pity, guilt, their last card. They assumed I, like most women, wouldn't be indifferent to an innocent child's future. I listened, didn't interrupt. I let his rage and her fake maternal plea pour out. I looked at their faces, twisted by fear, and felt nothing. No anger, no triumph, no pity, only a clear, cold awareness. When they finally ran out of words, the space between us fell into an eerie silence. I could hear the beeping of checkout counters, children laughing somewhere in the parking lot. Life outside went on, oblivious to this little theater. I simply stepped around them, the way one walks around two useless street poles, gripping the strap of my bread and milk bag. Heading home, I didn't look back. Behind me was only a thick, dead silence, like the echo of a shattered bell fading in the air, leaving the two of them stranded on the sidewalk. 2 days later, Marlene called. Her voice cracked through sobs. "Serena, please," she wept into the phone. "Hudson's falling apart. He says you've gone crazy, says someone's poisoned your mind. Everyone's here. Your uncles, Aunt Marjorie, the cousins. Everyone's worried. All our lives. Whenever something happened, we talked it through, didn't we? Please come to my house tonight. Just a family talk, calm and respectful, for old time's sake, for me. Please?" I listened, and I knew this wasn't a family meeting. This was a makeshift trial, where I would be cast as the unstable wife, poisoned by friends like James, and Hudson and Noelle would play the helpless victims trying to save the sick woman. They wanted to restore the old order, the whole family as audience, as jury, deciding whether I was allowed to be angry. "Sure, Mom," I replied, my voice even and soft. I'll come tonight. On the other end, a relieved sigh was audible. What they didn't know was, I wasn't coming to beg. I was coming to end it. At 7 p.m., I stepped into Marlene's apartment. The living room, usually loud and lively, was now thick with tension. On the sofa, in the armchairs, were familiar faces. Mr. Vale, my father-in-law, Aunt Marjorie, some cousins, a few other relatives. All of them looked at me with the same expression. Part pity, part curiosity, part hope that maybe there was a simpler, easier story to believe Hudson and Noelle sat in the center, on the big sofa, like it was their stage. He had his head bowed, hands covering his face, the picture of a grieving man. They had already told their version of events before I arrived. Now it was my turn. I gently set down my handbag and sat across from them. Hudson looked up, and I had to admit, he wasn't a bad performer. His voice shook in all the right places, pulling sighs from around the room. He spoke about a wife who suddenly changed, about signs of instability, about me acting irrational, all conveniently bundled into one word: illness. Then he moved on to how tired he was, how hard he tried, the tragedy of one night when a child was conceived, and how he was just a man trying to do the right thing. Noelle chimed in with lines both soft and accusing. We only wanted to help Serena. She hasn't been herself since the baby, and then smoothly shifted the blame toward James, my longtime friend, painted as some emotional affair, claiming all the financial safeguards and account freezes were because I'd been manipulated by James, cut off from family. Her tone was soaked in faux concern. The room grew quiet. All eyes turned to me, waiting for a meltdown, a sobbing fit, or maybe a flurry of messy justifications. I noticed Noelle's phone was angled discreetly, already recording, making sure I was framed in the shot. I said nothing. I just lowered my head, opened my bag, and pulled out a slim file. I placed it on the glass coffee table. This is the petition Hudson submitted to the court 2 months ago, I said slowly, eyes not on him, but on Mr. Vale and Aunt Marjorie. In it, he claimed I mixed up salt and sugar, talked to a crib, sat for hours hugging a pillow, as symptoms of mental deterioration. I slid the papers toward Mr. Vale. He picked them up and began reading. His eyes slowed. His face lengthened, as though someone had just placed another cross on his shoulders. He passed the papers to Aunt Marjorie. On the sofa, Hudson jumped up. That was because I was worried about you, Serena. I just wanted a doctor to check you, just to be sure. His voice cracked. I didn't argue. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out a voice recorder. I pressed play. Noelle's voice. You sure this is going to work? It's been a while. And his reply, bored, stripped of pretense. Don't worry, few more months and everything's ours. She's worthless now. I turned my gaze from Noelle to Hudson, looking directly at him, long enough for him to know I saw it all. The cowardice, the weakness, the rot beneath the surface. Then I asked quietly, just loud enough for the two of them to hear, but each word dropped like a hammer. Was the idea to declare me incompetent yours, or hers? I didn't yell, didn't accuse, I simply asked. But the question hit like a slap. Mr. Vale stood first. He looked directly at his son, eyes old, but now filled with a coldness I'd never seen in him before. You, he said slowly, every word heavy as lead, are no longer my son. He turned and walked to the bedroom, not saying another word. The other relatives, without being told, rose one by one, avoiding eye contact with Hudson and Noelle, like they were a stain that wouldn't wash out. Only Marlene remained slumped in the corner of the sofa, face buried in her hands, sobbing. Hudson and Noelle stood stranded in the middle of the living room. Every image of the heartbroken husband, the man just trying to save his sick wife, went up in smoke with the press of a button. I bent down, picked up the recorder and the file, slipped them into my bag, and didn't say another word. Then I turned and walked toward the door. I walked out to my car, heard the engine start, saw the streetlights reflect across my windshield. There were no more calls from Hudson or Marlene after that night. No apologies, no explanations, no attempts to reach out. The world they built on lies and theater had collapsed, and from the moment I stepped through that door, I knew. I no longer lived inside it. 6 months after the birthday party fell apart, my house barely had any trace of Hudson left. One morning, as sunlight poured into the living room, I stood in the space once crowded with heavy velvet drapes and oversized furniture, and suddenly realized I could no longer stand the kind of luxury he used to obsess over. I started with the smallest things, unhooking each thick, wine-colored curtain my mother-in-law had once complimented, folding them and putting them in a cardboard box. Dragging the massive leather sofa he bragged was authentic Italian, and listing it online. Hauling down all the tacky, gold-toned, metallic-framed paintings I'd never truly liked, and moving them to the garage. I repainted the walls a soft sunshine hue. No more imported golden wallpaper, Hudson had said. Looks like a palace. I hung up thin linen curtains by hand, letting the breeze make them flutter like butterfly wings. The kitchen, too. I tucked the four guests only china into a high cabinet and brought out a simple set of bowls that felt right in my hand, kept them on the open shelf on the counter. Just the coffee machine and a few clean glass jars with flour, brown sugar, and sea salt. Every corner of the house, every item I chose to keep or let go of, felt like adjusting my life. Less show, more breath. At night, when I turned on the lights, the house no longer felt like a stage. It felt like a place where I could exhale, sit cross-legged on the floor, read a book, or cry if I needed to. Without fear of judgment, I enrolled in an online business management course, sat in front of my laptop at 5 a.m., holding a cup of Ethiopian coffee, my eyes alert as I learned how to read a financial report. It didn't make me feel smarter, it made me feel present. No longer the person signing wherever she was told, but the one who knew exactly what she was signing a few months later. With my uncle's guidance, I decided to sell the Buckhead condo. On the day I signed the transfer papers, I didn't cry, didn't feel regret. I just looked at the line where it said, Current owner, Serena Vale, then at the amount that would be wired to the company account, and felt a strange kind of gratitude. At least, all those silent years had left me with something that could be turned into freedom. That money became a reserve fund. It helped me restructure the company. I hired an experienced operations director, paid off old debts, upgraded machinery with a proper plan, and set up a stable payroll for the workers. James still came by regularly, not as a rescuer, but like an old friend stopping by for tea after work. One day, he brought a small gardenia plant, dark green leaves, a few white buds not fully open, and placed it on the corner of the balcony where Hudson used to smoke cigars. This suits you more than those fake palms, he said, sitting on the step, rolling up his sleeves with a quiet smile. I bent down and touched the leaves, and the scent of the flower was faint, clean, like fresh soap. We rarely talked about Hudson. If we did, it was in passing, like someone mentioning an old acquaintance from another city. Irrelevant now. Most of our conversations were about small things, a new coffee shop that had opened on the corner, my uncle thinking about retirement, me wondering whether I should switch from Ethiopian beans to try something new. James didn't confess love, didn't make promises, didn't give grand advice. He just sat there, in the new wooden chair I bought, holding a cup of mint tea, listening as I talked about inspecting the factory, about how it felt to sign a contract where I was the one setting the terms, not just nodding along. Some evenings, we didn't talk at all, just listened to the insects outside and the clinking of ice in our glasses. I realized I no longer felt lonely in those silences. James's quiet presence, the blooming gardenia, the freshly painted walls, the home I had rearranged to match my own rhythm, all of it whispered one simple truth. I was living a life I had built with my own hands, slowly, quietly, not for anyone to witness, but it was mine. Every now and then, rumors drifted to me like wind slipping through a crack in the door. Hudson had rented a small apartment in the suburbs. The newborn cried through the night. He knocked on old acquaintances' doors, asking for loans, but was met with slammed doors and echoed no's. Noel had left, suitcase in hand, chasing the hope of finding a man wealthier than the last. To me, that story was over, a closed book gathering dust on a high shelf, its hardcover faded, never to be opened again. I didn't choose revenge. I chose to live, to feel free air moving through every cell, to hear laughter ring from the kitchen while burning the edge of homemade bread, to sleep through the night without dreams. This morning, like every morning, I stepped out onto the balcony just as the sun rose, cradling a hot cup of Ethiopian coffee, steam curling with the scent of mountain earth. I inhaled deeply, listening to the city wake, birds chirping on the roof, the distant roll of cars like a steady heartbeat, golden light stretching across the pinewood floor. I had polished myself. For 5 years of marriage, I was just the foundation, steady, silent, so someone else could build their castle on top. But now I see, I'm the entire house complete, with private floors full of books and flowers, wide windows that welcome sunlight, a roof that shelters my own life, and breezes that drift through windows of my choosing. At 30, I've only just begun to build, each brick a smile, each door a hope, each window a light I chose myself. And if you're still listening at this very moment, I want to thank you, truly thank you for staying through the whole story, for walking with me through pain, silence, and this quiet peace. If you found something meaningful in this journey, please hit like, subscribe, and share the moment that stayed with you. Tell me which city, which country you're listening from. I always treasure the feeling that somehow we're sitting together, even if thousands of miles apart. And remember, sometimes life only truly begins the moment you choose yourself.